Hello, I'm Ollie and this is CriminOlly, where I talk about crime, pulp, horror, that kind of thing. Today, everything I read in June. So I've got 24 books to talk to you about today, and I'm going to structure this video slightly differently from my normal monthly wrap-ups. So you may remember this month I kind of split my reading into three different sections. So I was reading westerns from Junior on the Range, I was reading a variety of books for different projects and things like that I'm engaged in at the moment, and I was trying to read some more extreme horror just to open myself up a bit more to that subgenre. So that's how I'm going to structure this video today. I'll talk about each of those different sections separately rather than just talking chronologically about everything I've read in the month, and I will tell you my favourite book for each of those three sections as well, and then at the end I'll tell you my overall favourite book of the month. So I'm going to do them in that order. I'm going to start with westerns, then I'm going to do other stuff, and then I'm going to do the extreme horror, and it ended up being a bit broader than extreme horror. There's some non-extreme horror in there as well. I'll do the horror at the end. I will leave timestamps in the video so you can skip forward to a particular section should you want to do that. Right, let's start with westerns then. So it was, of course, June on the Range this month, the fantastic annual western themed reading event created by Michael K. Vaughan. I was delighted to be a co-host again and had a really fun time. So I've got 8 books to talk to you about for that, 8 westerns, and in fact I've got 8 in each of the 3 sections. That wasn't really planned, it's just how it ended up. So this is in the order that I read them then, the westerns. So the first was Longarm and the Vanishing Virgin by James Reasoner. The name on the cover is Tabor Evans, but that's a house name. This was really fun, just a really fun, slightly spicy western. It has Longarm, who's this marshal, trying to track down a woman who's kind of run away on the eve of her wedding, and discovering there's more than meets the eye to that, as you might expect. Just a fun read, some good action, some good kind of western vibes, and a little bit of, not romance exactly, but a little bit of kind of saucy action. So yeah, I enjoyed that one a lot. Next up then, we have The Time It Never Rained by Elmer Kenton. So this is definitely has a western vibe, but unlike most westerns, it's set in the 1950s. So this is about an area in Texas where, and it's based on truth, where for years it didn't rain, and it's about the impact of that on the farming community, and in particular one farmer, the central character, who kind of completely refuses to take any handouts from the government, and it's about that, the impact of his decisions on his farm and himself and his family. It was just really great, really gripping, very moving, fantastic characters, great sense of place. I really like this a lot. Next up then we have an Edge book. So you may remember I've been reading this Edge series since the start of the channel. So this is book 23, Echoes of War. This is a very battered US edition of it. The books are by George G. Gilman. So George G. Gilman is the name on the cover. The guy's actual name was Terry Harknett, a British writer. This was a fun one. So the Edge books are always a bit more violent than many westerns, and indeed that's kind of how they were marketed back in the day when they came out. This one I think came out either late 70s or early 80s. So this one has Edge going on like a riverboat cruise. There's all sorts of kind of evildoers that he meets along the way, and some nicer people as well who he tries to protect. But yeah, just so, again, some fun western action, a bit of humour. Terry Harknett's humour can be a little bit grating at times, but it wasn't too bad in this one, and some really good action sequences as well. So yeah, enjoyed that one. Next up then, we have a dime novel. So I said I wanted to read a dime novel for June on the Range. So one of those kind of pulpy books that was originally published kind of at the same time as the Western era, and was sold to people, but I think primarily in cities back east, to give them a flavour of what things were like in the West. So I read Old California Joe by Captain Carleton, which was quite entertaining. I'm very glad I read it. I didn't necessarily massively love it as a book, but it was good. It's about this kind of old prospector type character who has a rifle and is like a sharpshooter. His rifle he calls Grease Lightning, and it's about him going up against like various opponents, and also some kind of other people he meets and whose lives he has an impact on. So yeah, not fantastic, but entertaining enough. And then I also wanted to read a Max Brand book. So I read a Max Brand Dr. Kildare book a while ago. I really enjoyed it. He's best known as a Western writer, so I thought I'd read one of his Westerns. And I read the one that probably has the most name recognition because it's been filmed a couple of times, and that was Destry Rides Again. So this is a book about a guy who gets sent to prison for a crime he claims he didn't commit, a train robbery, and when he gets out of prison tries to get revenge on the jury members who sent him to prison. And it wasn't as good as, I mean, that plot sounds fantastic, and it just didn't quite work as well as I hoped it would. There were some really nice bits of humour in the book, and again there were some good kind of action set pieces, but overall it just didn't quite click for me as much as I expected it to. I really enjoyed that Dr. Kildare book, so I had high hopes for that one, and it did disappoint me slightly, I'm afraid. So next up, another fun pulpy Western, kind of similar to the Longarm book. So this was The Gunsmith, book 66, Outlaw Trail by J.R. Roberts. The author's real name was Robert Randisi, and amazingly he wrote all of the books in the Gunsmith series, and there are literally hundreds of them. So this was entertaining. So Clint Smith, the main character, who's a gunsmith but also a gunfighter, in this one he meets this young woman. He kind of starts a relationship with her. In the town that they're in, there's a couple of women who've been arrested and who are on trial for a crime that they claim they are innocent of, and the young woman and some of the other local women believe that they are innocent. There ends up being a jailbreak, and Clint Smith kind of goes on the hunt for them to try and protect them from themselves and try and protect them from a prospective lynch mob. It was fun and interesting. There were some really good like horse racing scenes in this book. There was like a horse racing subplot. So yeah, I did enjoy it a lot. But yeah, not an absolutely amazing book, but definitely a fun read. Next up then, we have A Wind of Knives by Ed Kurtz, which was a kind of revenge novel. I really enjoyed this. So this is about a guy whose male lover is murdered brutally by a gang, and it's about him going on the hunt, trying to hunt down the gang and get revenge on them. There were some interesting kind of mystical elements to the book. This kind of wolf character that you can see on the cover crops up a few times, but it just had a really good Western vibe. It really felt realistic in its portrayal of the Old West, and the fact that it kind of centred around a gay relationship, I thought was really interesting and very well handled in the book. So I enjoyed that one a lot. And then the final thing I read for June on the Range was Fatal Elixir by Willem L. D'Andrea. So this was the second book in a series that D'Andrea wrote. I read the first one of those, Written in Fire, a while ago and really loved it, so I was keen to read the second one. Sadly, he died before this book was even published, actually. And it's a real shame because you can see what he was doing in terms of setting up the town that the book is set in and the characters. I think it would have turned into a really fantastic series. So it's about these, the two central characters are a guy who was a kind of rough, tough sheriff who was injured and is now in a wheelchair, and a writer who has written a series of dime novels about the sheriff character. They now run a newspaper together in this small town, and in this book a kind of like snake oil salesman comes to town, like a travelling medicine show, and a load of people in the town fall very ill and some die after sampling his medicine. So it's really about that. That's the central mystery in the book, is the two main characters trying to figure out what's happened. It was really entertaining, and as I say, you can see D'Andrea like putting together the different pieces of this series, introducing small subplots and things like that, which he obviously meant to continue. So yeah, very sad that he didn't live to write more of the books. I think he was only in his 40s when he died. But yeah, enjoyed that very much indeed. So my favourite Western then is this one, The Time It Never Rained by Elmer Kenton. I really liked Fatal Elixir and Wind of Knives, but this just beat them. This was so good. Such a great novel. A book I think everyone would enjoy, whether you are a fan of Westerns or not. It's just so heartfelt and so moving and so gripping. It really was fantastic. Okay, let's move on to other stuff then. So this is things I was, well, it started off being things I was reading for different projects. I did throw a couple of other books in there as well. So let me talk to you about them. So the first one was Big Man by Ed McBain, which I read for my project to finish reading all of the books by Ed McBain / Evan Hunter, my favourite writer. I've still got dozens to go because he was very prolific. This was a very early book from him. One of his, I think probably certainly one of the first 10 books he wrote. And it was interesting. So Hunter was of Italian descent. So his parents, I believe, were Italian immigrants to America. And this kind of taps into that Italian-American side really, really heavily. It's about this young guy who ends up becoming an enforcer for the mob, and just about his kind of growth in terms of his stature within the mob. So his kind of career, if you like. I really enjoyed it. It's definitely a crime doesn't pay style of a story, but it was fantastic. It was really dark. You can tell it's an early work at times. There was a little bit of clumsiness in it, but I really enjoyed the way the story moved along, and the ending in particular was fantastic. So yeah, enjoyed that one. Next up then, another book by a favourite author, one I didn't enjoy as much, Fairy Tale by Stephen King. So this is a book that I would really divide into 3 different sections. So the basic plot of this book is that there's this teenager in like modern America. He meets this old guy who's a bit of a recluse who lives in the same town, and he like basically helps this guy out. He calls the paramedics when the guy is having a heart attack, and they become friends. And the guy has access to a gateway to a fantasy world, basically. So it's that kind of story. And that's the kind of story I tend to really enjoy, where you've got the main character travelling between our world and a fantasy world. So the first part of this book is great, like really, really great. Some lovely writing from King as he builds up this relationship between these two characters and starts teasing the concept of this other world. I really enjoyed that section. Then you have the fantasy world. And the early parts of him, the main character, this teenager in the fantasy world, I just didn't enjoy. It just felt a bit ridiculous. It's very, as the title would suggest, to be fair to King, it's very fairy tale-ish rather than kind of more traditional fantasy type stuff. So those parts I didn't enjoy. You then get another section which is actually great, which really felt like kind of Edgar Rice Burroughs, like one of the Barsoom books. I won't spoil what it is, but it was just full of action and really, really enjoyable. And then the book wraps up with an ending that wasn't very satisfying. So definitely a mixed bag. I gave it 3 stars overall. I thought parts of it were kind of 5-star, but parts of it just didn't work for me at all. So definitely overall a disappointment, but with some high points. After that then, I read a book that wasn't on my TBR originally. Let me find somewhere to put that. Day of the Jackal by Frederick Forsyth. So Frederick Forsyth died this month. And I've read a couple of his later books, but I'd never read his most famous book, Day of the Jackal. So I thought I would give it a try. And I loved it. Absolutely fantastic. So about an assassin who is hired to assassinate General de Gaulle, the French president, or President de Gaulle as he was, and just about his plotting that out, but also about the forces of law and order kind of realising something's going on and trying to stop him. So you get these two halves to the book. Both absolutely fascinating, just felt really, really well thought through and realistic, fantastically gripping, and the ending was brilliant as well. So I enjoyed that very much indeed. Okay, next up, a comics. This was very kindly sent to me by a viewer, Jesse, recently. So this is Die Hard Year 1. So I didn't even know this existed until Jesse sent it to me, but it's an interesting and fun read. So it's by, so the writer is Howard Chaykin, and the art is by Stephen Thompson. So this is basically set in 1976. You may be able to see that on the cover, and it's like John McClane as a rookie cop in New York. So it's a fun idea. It's not perfect. It doesn't necessarily have a real Die Hard vibe to it. So in this one, some kind of terrorists have taken over a yacht, and McClane is trying to rescue the inhabitants of the yacht. And it is set against the backdrop of the bicentennial celebrations in New York. So a nice kind of backdrop to it. But the actual plot didn't really feel that Die Hardy. Kind of on paper it sounds Die Hardy, but it didn't feel as much like a Die Hard story as I would have liked. But McClane definitely felt like McClane, so it was fun to read from that perspective. Next up then, the CriminOlly book club pick for this month was The Descent by Jeff Long. So a few of my patrons and channel members and I read this. This was interesting but not great. It's definitely fits my definition of what a science fiction novel is. And by that I mean it is a book that is very, very focused on ideas. So the central idea of this book is that there are labyrinthine tunnels beneath the surface of the earth, inhabited by strange creatures. And the book basically just like follows through the impact of that discovery on humanity, on civilization, and talks about various people who are impacted by that, like going exploring in the tunnels and what happens when they interact with these creatures and that kind of thing. So it's an interesting concept, but I was expecting a really propulsive kind of plot driven adventure type story, and I didn't really get that, unfortunately. So interesting, but not totally successful for me. The next one I read then was The Hunt for Red October by Tom Clancy. So a reread for me. This was originally the book I was going to read for My Novel Life this month. That's the challenge where I'm reading a book from every year I've been alive. This was from 1984, but I had read it before, so I picked another book from 1984, which I'll talk about in a moment. So this, again, really fun. You probably know the story. So a Soviet submarine commander steals a top secret new Soviet submarine and tries to defect to America. And Jack Ryan, who's a CIA operative, gets involved in trying to communicate with him and trying to help him. And it's fun. There's so much cool, interesting kind of submarine information in this book, which is a kind of a bit of a nerd. I really, really enjoyed, and it definitely feels credible in terms of the inner workings of the US military. Tom Clancy definitely had some kind of inside information, so that part of the book works really, really well. It's probably a bit longer than it needed to be. I felt it dragged a little bit in the final third. It kind of almost feels like it finishes and then it goes on a bit more. But still a really, really fun read. The one thing that was notable for me was there's much less interaction between the Soviet submarine commander and Ryan than I remembered there being. And I think that's because there's a lot more of that in the movie than there is in the book. So yeah, entertaining, but yeah, not quite as good as I remembered it, but still a fun read. After that then, the actual book I read for My Novel Life for 1984 was Proof by Dick Francis. So this is a British thriller, and it was really entertaining. So it's about a guy who's a wine merchant who gets involved with the police investigating counterfeit booze. So they kind of bring him in because they think that he will be able to tell the difference, like taste-wise, between real alcohol and alcohol that's being badged. So it's things like cheap whiskey being sold as single malts and things like that. So he gets involved with both the police and with a detective who, for various reasons, is investigating this scam as well. And it was just a really enjoyable story, really nicely laid out, not too long, like a good length for a thriller, about kind of 250 pages, I think. Very, very entertaining. The central character had a lot of depth to him. He had an interesting backstory, and you really cared about him. You really came to care about his survival through the story. And it also had, in common with a few of the books I've read this month, an absolutely fantastic ending. I really, really enjoyed the way it all came together at the end, and in particular the way he defeated the bad guys. So that again was a very entertaining one. Next up we have a new release, King of Ashes by S.A. Cosby, and this one was slightly disappointing. I've really enjoyed S.A. Cosby's previous books, and this one just wasn't quite as good. So it's about a guy who goes back to the small town that he grew up in because his dad has been injured in a car accident, and when he goes back he discovers that his brother he's basically got into trouble with some local drug dealers. So the book really is about him trying to help his brother get out of that situation. There is an interesting backstory as well about their mum who disappeared when they were kids, but it just doesn't quite hang together as well as I hoped it would. And I think that subplot about the mum disappearing was fantastically well done. I really enjoyed that. But the main plot around him helping his brother out just didn't quite work. It didn't have as much propulsiveness as I felt it needed. It didn't have as much tension as I felt it needed. Despite there being some, quite hefty violence in the book, there wasn't really that sense of peril. And I think that's partly because I just didn't get as into the characters' minds as I would have liked to have done. I didn't care about them as much as I needed to really, for the book to really, really grip me. So still a decent read, but not as good as Cosby's previous ones. Moving on then, we have the final book I read from like the other section then was The Moon is a Harsh Mistress by Robert A. Heinlein. So I read this as a buddy read with my dad. So you may remember we're reading his 12 favourite books through the course of the year. This was a reread for me, and I didn't like it quite as much as I remembered. Like The Descent, I think it's a really good science fiction novel. It's got some really interesting ideas and it does interesting things with those ideas. But the story and the plot didn't really grip me. So it's about a lunar colony. It's set in 2075, so not too far in the future now. The book was originally published in the 60s. So it's about a lunar colony where there is a computer that kind of runs the colony, so an artificial intelligence. And there's a kind of rebellion growing within the community of people who live on the moon because they feel like they're being exploited by like big corporations and things like that back on Earth. And they end up using this AI to help them with their rebellion. So an interesting, really interesting concept, and still feels like a decent sci-fi type concept today, let alone back in the 1960s. It feels like that's a credible vision of what 2075 might be like. But yeah, the plot just didn't grip me as much as I hoped it would. Okay, so what is my favourite of the other books? This is probably the most difficult one for me to make a decision on, actually. I think I'm going to go with Day of the Jackal by Frederick Forsyth. Just so gripping. It really lives up to the hype. An excellent thriller. Okay, so the final section then is the horror that I read. So this started out being about extreme horror, and I most of this stuff I think is extreme horror adjacent, even if it wouldn't necessarily be labelled extreme horror. So yeah, let me go through what I read. So the first thing then was a short story, The Eternal Flower of Your Soul by Klaus Kinion. This was really great. I enjoyed this enormously. Enjoyed is maybe the wrong word because it's absolutely horrific, but I thought it was fantastically well done. So this is it's presented as if you are watching a video recording. And it's a video recording of a Japanese woman who is like a Marie Kondo type character, so like a declutterer. And she is basically talking to the camera as she gradually mutilates herself. And it's such a horrible concept, and it doesn't pull any punches at all, and it doesn't necessarily have any surprises either. It kind of does exactly what you would expect from that description, but it was just incredibly gripping. I couldn't stop reading it, and really powerful stuff. I thought it was great. A really good use of like extreme gore, extreme horror to make the reader feel something more than just disgust. I thought it was excellent. After that then, I read some manga. So I read Beautiful Monster by Maruo Suehiro. This is a series of extremely graphic and horrible short stories. I cannot open this book because the chances of me opening it at a page that didn't have something really horrible on it are just too small. So this is what is known as Iroguro horror or Iroguro manga. So that's a kind of mixture of erotic and grotesque. So like very graphic. And erotic is not the word I would use to describe it. Sexually explicit, definitely, but I wouldn't call it erotic. So a series of short stories, but all of which have like horrible concepts at the heart of them, but which are very well done. And again, like the Klaus Kinion short story, you get the sense that there's more going on than just the graphic stuff. There's something behind these stories. There's concepts and ideas behind these stories, which are like genuinely interesting, but also like deeply surreal, very weird. Reminded me a bit of kind of David Cronenberg or David Lynch at times. Yeah, just very strange stuff, but very interesting, and I'm glad that I read it. Next up then, we have Butcher by Joyce Carol. So I have done a review of this one on the channel. This was fantastic. So this is about a guy, so a doctor in 19th century America, who works in a female asylum and does horrific experiments on the female patients to try and prove his medical theories and hone his medical skills. So someone who is, exploiting vulnerable people, basically. And it's fascinating. It's like very, very graphic and horrible at times, very dark and very disturbing at times. But it's written as like a series of journal entries and things like that, mainly from the doctor. And he was such a fascinating character, completely self-deluded, completely, full of himself, and has no regard at all for anyone else, really. So it was a really interesting depiction of that kind of character. I found it an absolutely fascinating and gripping book. It's quite funny at times, unexpectedly funny, because he is so deluded and so like his opinions, which I suspect were like common opinions at the time. His opinions of women and the female anatomy are just so, to a reader today, just feel so completely ludicrous that the book is almost funny at times. So yeah, a really fantastic and interesting book. I definitely am keen to read more Joyce Carol Oates. Next up then, some more extreme horror. I think you call this extreme horror, or certainly splatterpunk. So this was The Summer Is Ended and We Are Not Yet Saved by Joey Como. So this is about a young guy who's, I think he's like 11 or 12, who ends up going to a religious summer camp. And at that religious summer camp, there is a slasher who gradually murders the kids and like the people who work there. So there is some really graphic kind of slasher type horror in this book. But the heart of the book, and the part that I thought was brilliantly well done, was a series of letters between the son and his mum, who's back home. So she's gone to work. She works in movies. She's gone to work on a movie, and that's why he's had to go and stay at this summer camp. So she feels guilty about that, and you get these lovely letters back and forth between them whilst he's staying there. And their relationship was really fantastically well done. I really enjoyed reading it, and you really come to care about both of them, which adds real tension to the book. So yeah, I thought that was great. And then the next one, which is definitely extreme horror, was The Big Head by Edward Lee. This was a fascinating and surprising book. It was not what I expected. It's very, very graphic. It's absolutely full of like sexual assault and sexual violence. And it pulls no punches. It goes into detail, but without lingering on that detail, if that makes sense. So he tells you like incredibly horrific things that happen, but constrains those to a single sentence or two, rather than pages and pages like you see with some extreme horror. But a fascinating and really interesting book. So there's kind of a number of different strands to this book. So there's like a series of chapters about this character, the Big Head, who is kind of this kind of slightly monstrous guy who lives out in the woods and like just attacks people and has no like morals at all. There's a couple of young women who have come back to like the same area. So one of them grew up there. And one of them is a woman she's kind of met along the way. So you get some stuff about them trying to, kind of explore the local community. There's a priest who's come to re-establish an abbey that's nearby to kind of open it back up again. And he's got like a very interesting past. There's some interesting stuff around him. And then there's this couple of really horrible guys who are just going around basically like raping and murdering people. So all of this comes together in this kind of messy mix that works really, really well. There's some really interesting ideas in this book, and I thought Edward Lee explored kind of concepts of morality and things like that in a very, very interesting way. It's, as I say, absolutely horrific at times. It's also very humorous at times, and I just thought it worked brilliantly. It was much, much better and more interesting than I expected it to be. Okay, moving on then, some more horror, not extreme horror this time. This I would label as sci-fi horror, and I think it's probably more sci-fi than horror, to be fair. So this was The Edge of Insanity by James Flynn, a short story collection. So an interesting collection of short stories. A lot of these felt like the kind of pulpy, imaginative sci-fi stories that you might get in like a kind of 50s magazine, that kind of vibe, like robots and rocket ships and things like that, but some like decently horrific horror woven into them as well. So yeah, fun, short reads, you know, good kind of coffee break kind of reads. I enjoyed it a lot, and if you like that, if you like the sound of it, if you like that kind of thing, definitely worth checking out. Apologies for the costume change, but I realised the day after filming this video that I'd actually forgotten to talk about one of the books I read in June. Maybe partly because it was quite forgettable. That book was Survivor by JF Gonzalez. So this is an extreme horror novel. It's a book that's quite well respected, I think, in the extreme horror community. I just didn't think it was any good at all. So it's about snuff movies, so a very, you know, disturbing subject matter. And it's in particular about a woman who gets kidnapped to appear in a snuff movie, and about her, you know, kind of battles against her captors. It's a weird mix of kind of modern thriller style writing and extreme violence. The violence I didn't think was terribly well done, and some of the characters are just like really paper thin and boring to read, and it also suffers from having really long sections of bad dialogue, like characters monologuing about their experiences in a way that, you know, some of the stuff they're talking about is kind of interesting, but it would have been much more interesting, I think, for JF Gonzalez to show the events that they're describing rather than have them talking about them. So overall, this was really a miss for me. I did have quite high expectations for it, but yeah, I really didn't think it was much good at all. Moving on then to the final thing I read this month, which has definitely left its mark on me. Another very, very graphic and disturbing book. Oh, actually, is it graphic? I'm not sure it is that graphic, but it's really, really disturbing. It's a bit like, I remember someone saying about the movie The Texas Chainsaw Massacre. I think it was John Carpenter, the film director, who said, when you watch the Texas Chainsaw Massacre the second time, you think you are watching a censored version of it. Because so much of the gore and the violence in Texas Chainsaw Massacre is kind of implied. It clearly is a very graphic film, but it's not as graphic and quite as horrific as you remember it being. So much of that, the horror of that film comes from like the tension and the setting, rather than actual graphic on-screen violence. So anyway, that brings me back to the book, which was The Sluts by Dennis Cooper. So this is a really powerful, really dark, intensely disturbing book. That centres around, so it's all written as kind of emails and web posts and things like that, and centres around a website where people can review male escorts. And there's a series of reviews of this one young male escort called Brad that get increasingly more weird and extreme as the book progresses. And you get this kind of portrait of Brad's life and the life of another guy that he's involved in. But the thing that's fascinating about this book, and like horrible things happen to Brad, and Brad appears to be like complicit in those things, that, you know, appears to welcome those horrible things. What's fascinating about the book though is that you don't really know what's real, because everything is just someone telling you something. So you don't know what's real, you don't know what's fantasy. There are lots of twists and turns in the story, you know, around that. But yeah, fascinating examination of our kind of online lives, I suppose, and the fact that we don't know if people are who they say they are online in the same way that we do in the real world. But yeah, intensely disturbing, really gripping. One of those books that you feel like you want to stop reading it, but you can't. I thought it was really, really excellent. So that gives me a difficult choice, because I can't decide. I genuinely can't decide which was the better book from my kind of horror section this month, if it was The Sluts or Butcher. I'm going to give it to Butcher, because I thought there was more richness to Butcher than to The Sluts, but I did think both were really, really excellent. And I'm also, now I've got to the end of the video, going to give Butcher my book of the month as well. I really thought it was a truly great book. Really fascinating, really deep, really richly layered. I definitely recommend it, but it does come with a lot of warnings. It is very, very graphic indeed. Okay, so that was my June. I think I actually had 25 books, not 24. I think I miscounted when I started. I think I had 9 in the other category, not 8. So anyway, let me know what you thought of my reading this month. Let me know your favourite book that you read in June. Let me know if you took part in June on the Range and how you enjoyed that event. And as always, thanks very much for watching. Hope you're safe and well out there. Hope you're reading good stuff. And I'll speak to you again very soon. Cheerio.